Well, let's unpack this further now with Professor Patrick Bond, a distinguished professor at the University of Johannesburg's Department of Sociology, where he directs the Center for Social Change. And we're also joined by public international law lecturer and advocate Evans Ogada, who we have asked to share some of his thoughts around, of course, the international law implications of the actions of the United States this morning. Prof. Bond, thank you so much. Really appreciate you being here. This is not unprecedented, but extraordinary nonetheless. What do you read the immediate implications of this to be?
Well, thanks for having me, Oliver. Greetings to your viewers. Well, it's an indication that Donald Trump is starting 2026 as the maximum bully, and I think we're going to see potential, let's say, confidence on his neoconservative militaristic side that will also threaten the governments of Cuba, of Nicaragua, of Colombia, maybe of Denmark, in terms of control of Greenland, where Donald Trump again has recently said he wants to take over. So we're now in a very lawless, Wild West sort of period in the Western Hemisphere that follows the national security report of Marco Rubio, basically saying the Western Hemisphere is ours. The old Monroe doctrine that the US will control that area is now being called the Donroe Trump doctrine, and that is something I think the world must wake up to and say, oh, you can't do that.
Yeah. Advocate Ogada, I just perhaps want to bring you in here. The international law is quite clear. The Geneva Convention is quite clear on the sanctity of the sovereignty of nation states. Quite clearly here, this invasion was a violation of Venezuelan sovereignty. But given that Donald Trump has been violating the sovereignty of nation states with impunity, not just in his term now, but also in his first term, one can assume that there will be no consequences bared to this. But what are the international legal considerations that must be undertaken by the Security Council when they meet?
Certainly, and good evening to your viewers. We don't expect anything much because such a flagrant violation of international law ought to be subject to the actions of the Security Council by virtue of its authority under Article 27 of the UN Charter. I would expect, of course, the United States and our usual allies to misuse the veto to scuttle any efforts that might emanate from the Security Council. So insofar as legitimate, robust, and meaningful action from the international scene, we don't expect anything much because of the politics of the UN Security Council.
Yeah, America's NATO partners, NATO member states, were quite quiet when he did this in Iraq, when America did this in Iraq, and when they did this once again in Syria. And of course, we saw, of course, what they did in Libya with the regime change of Gaddafi there as well. What does the world stand to lose this time around if they once again fold their arms?
Not only would Donald Trump be empowered to continue with his regime change, he, by the way, will probably feel the need to do that in the period between now and November, when he's going to face tough elections for his members of Congress. The House of Representatives will all turn over, plus a third of the Senate. So in a way, what we can often see from the US is these sorts of interventions as a distraction, as a way of exerting power abroad when things are going badly at home. And I think that's probably part of the calculation this year. The other aspect for international processes is the hypocrisy of the G7. There's a G6, which is Europe, Canada, Japan, and Donald Trump has broken free, as we saw here, not coming to the G20 here in Johannesburg, but also dropping out of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. That should get sanctions immediately on US goods because they are violating the world's responsibility to cut emissions. And secondly, the World Health Organization, which throws pandemic preparedness into question. Elon Musk, our South African born and raised ally of Trump initially in the first 6 months of 2025, cut US aid, the main agency for overseas development for AIDS medicines and other health, for climate support, for emergency aid, for food aid. And one report in The Lancet says that's 14 million people whose lives are threatened by 2030. How much more? Well, bombing Iran, supporting the genocide in Gaza by giving Benjamin Netanyahu just free rein, as he just did this last week. It is really time to ask, isn't it, Oliver, and to all the viewers, what can be done now to say this rogue activity must be stopped? We saw divisions, and only one country stood up to him on the sanctions, on tariffs, the trade sanctions in a sense, and that was China, which said, well, we'll put sanctions on you with the rare earth minerals. I think that's the signal that actually Trump cannot be forced to back down. The Houthis forced him out of the Red Sea by virtue of their drones and being able to shoot down US drones. And I think there are moments where you sort of see, well, some sort of resistance. I mean, I think we all have to remember what his own vice president, J.D. Vance, said. Donald Trump could be the next Adolf Hitler. And when he said that, which was just before the 2016 election, it was in a period of, we didn't really know him. Well, now we do, and I think we do have to worry that there is that sort of expansive and arrogant, and as some of our foreign minister says, white supremacist points of view that lead him into this activity that I think the world now must stand up against.
Yeah. Prof. Ogada, just once again to talk about the international community and its response to this. When the United Nations will have an Emergency Security Council meeting, presumably, as has been called by Antonio Guterres, and I assume that there will be a General Assembly engagement on this as well, perhaps also an extraordinary meeting. What responsibility would a multilateral body like the United Nations Security Council and General Assembly bear to the protection of Venezuelan sovereign integrity?
Well, I will use such platforms, and I will certainly expect Secretary Guterres and the world to remember where we have come from with this curved international order. Briefly, in terms of history, why did we have, for example, World War I? Because we had countries, 3 countries, Japan, Germany, Italy, pull out of the League of Nations, went out on solo rampage, expansionist agenda, attacking countries at random, and that led to World War I. That history should not be lost. So if the United States, and the United States has been the beneficiary of the post-war, the post-bellum world order from 1945 onwards, if we are to abandon the rule-based order, then we are going to stir up chaos, because these are the precipitate grounds for the start of possibly a World War III, because nobody will be feeling the need to be bound by rules. So the United States must realize that the rules-based order supersede any other exigencies or any appetite it may have. And it's for their politicians, the global community, to rein in this errant president, this president in the United States who appears not to understand anything and who appears to want to do anything as he pleases.
Yeah. What we learned from Syria, Libya to an extent, but Iraq as well, is that oftentimes when there's an invasion of a country, it leads to insurgencies on the ground. And oftentimes that leads to protracted wars, and of course that forms the pretext of America's continued war on terror, as they'd like to describe it. Do you anticipate that would happen in this instance as well?
Well, just to add all over Afghanistan, that was the crucial insurgency with the Taliban coming back, and in 2021, Joe Biden, Trump's predecessor, actually felt the need to pull out U.S. troops. So it can be done. Iraq has not gone well. The U.S. lost quite a few troops there when they invaded in 2003. I don't have a good sense of the extent to which the Venezuelan people, I mean, Ambassador Acevedo just told us, well, they're ready to fight. They were given many rifles. But that was a very, very decisive strike earlier this morning. And the vice president, Darcy Rodriguez is a loyalist and coming out of the Chavez tradition, the left. But according to Marco Rubio, he talked to her and said, no, she's willing to do business. Interestingly, Trump said that the sort of, let's say, popular middle class leadership, including the Nobel Prize winner, isn't ready to take over. Edmundo Gonzalez was the candidate against Maduro in 2024. Maduro didn't really prove well that he'd won. He just said he'd won. They never released the ballots, and therefore he lost the support of, for example, Lula in Brazil, or in Mexico at the time, the President AMLO, or President Gustavo Petro in Colombia. So the left didn't hold together to support him. Cuba's very weak. Nicaragua is very, very weak and no longer really a left government. And I think that's the biggest question, because Maduro was captured. He's no longer in Venezuela. Unlike 2002, where Chavez, having been captured, taken away, the masses of the people came back in that coup attempt and brought him back into power. And I don't think that, from what I understand, and I at one point was a Telesur columnist about a decade ago, so I kept an eye. I've been to Venezuela, but I don't think anymore that that sort of mass popular support can be counted on. I think it's going to be up to all the rest of us to say, well, maybe protesting at U.S. Embassies and consulates, and starting sanctions, those would be the ways forward if the Venezuelan people feel that the U.S. will really clamp down on any dissent.
Yeah. Of course, I perhaps want to ask about Russia, China, and Iran as well, because they also have economic interests tied to the fortunes of Venezuela and its political stability, which Nicolas Maduro was an important interlocutor of. Do you anticipate that they would throw their support behind Delcy Rodriguez as she assumes a head of state position?
Probably will. They'll make continuing objections, and there may be a debate in the Security Council. As Evan said, probably the U.S. will just veto, and that'll be that. We've seen once before where a coup within the BRICS countries, before Iran joined, and that was an internal coup against the Brazilian president. That was in 2016, and there was a lot of discussion then about the potential for the BRICS to say, no, we won't deal with the new president of Brazil. But they never did. And I think that's the biggest dilemma for the BRICS. They talk left, they walk right. They don't really do very much to change the status quo. So I doubt we'll see China, Russia, Iran standing up. In fact, Iran is probably hunkering down because, again, Donald Trump has said, yeah, Israel, you can go and bomb them. We can take out the Iranians, the popular unrest there may be giving them some sort of excuse.
Yeah. Should Advocate Ogada, should the Venezuelans decide to take an armed struggle against the U.S., hopefully to liberate, or with the pretext of liberating Maduro, the two countries would effectively be engaged in war. America would then be entitled to invoke Article 5 of the NATO treaty, and its allies would then have to militarily get involved as well. Are there instances through which that could legally be blocked?
Well, certainly through the aegis of the United Nations, because as your viewers must remember, the primary requirement under the UN Charter is pacifism. So if you want to resolve any dispute, use peaceful resolution. So that can be invoked to stop any war or any physical engagement between the two countries. That having been said, look at what the US did today. Venezuela can validly claim and can go through the Security Council and use her allies to justify a claim for self-defense. Because what happened today was aggression. It was an attack on a sovereign state, unprecedented, and even the arrest of President Maduro. You may not like Maduro, you may not like what he's been doing, but he is a valid president exercising effective power. That is not how to deal with a sovereign head of states. Put him in handcuffs and take him to purportedly try him through your municipal courts. The United States is setting a bad precedent.
Yeah. Advocate Ogada, thank you so much for your time and your insights. Really do appreciate it.